Welcome to the World Language Coordinator's orientation session for state resources or refresher session for our state resources. This information is being broadcast on Wednesday, August 9th, 2023, but the asynchronous recording will also be available soon for everyone. As we get started with our agenda, I wanted to share with you that we put this together so that we could welcome you to the World Languages Resources Hub and make sure you know it's there, and kind of go over the ABCs and Ds of the hub, of the materials and maybe resources that could be most critical to your work as a World Language Coordinator for a district or charter school, or a program in particular. I put this together with the help of some of the most experienced world language coordinators in the state, and they're the ones who are going to be focused in the panel on September 6th. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But basically, as I said, our agenda follows this A, B, C, and D pattern with our state resources. So the A is for administrator guides, and those are a support tool for our World Language Essential Standards. But also the A is for the actual proficiency scale, which is used nationally and which we use here in North Carolina, as do many states, for our proficiency-based state standards. B is for our bridging documents, and those bridging documents focus on our proficiency outcomes for every course or program that we have in our World Language State Standards. The bridging documents were actually a tool created quite recently, and they were part of our sequencing and our thinking about how we keep students learning and building their language skills, even during, for example, the times of the pandemic when things were very fluid and changing quite a bit. The C is for the clarifying objectives by course outcomes, or COCOs, materials that we have. These are curriculum writing documents that are standards based and allow teachers or others to write a curriculum or local pacing guide or whatnot, making sure they're adhering to those clarifying objectives for each course that they're teaching. And so again, focusing on the proficiency outcomes and that proficiency scale, but also a resource for you to use locally in a number of ways as a coordinator. We'll also cover with that some language-specific resources that are available in our World Languages Resources Hub, because teachers often ask, are there any materials online for free that I can access and use in my curriculum, for example, for reading passages or listening passages or something like that. And so we'll kind of take a look at that. And then finally, the D stands for Development for Educators, or Professional Development, our famous PD. I want to share with you what's in the World Languages Resources Hub about that, both from NCDPI and other organizations that are critical to our work as world language educators. And finally, we'll do a wrap up and talk about some next steps, because our learning starts today, of course, with the start of the new school year, but will continue throughout the year and into the future. All right, well, let's get started. First of all, I want to welcome you to the World Languages Resources Hub. This is where a lot of our materials are stored online so that you can get to them, or anyone can get to them. You can send your teachers there if you need to. I will go ahead and put that link in the chat box. And please know that there's a handout that goes with this presentation that I will post later with all of our materials. So you will have access to that. But there's where our resources are at. The hub is actually only about a year old, in fact, almost exactly a year old. It was rolled out officially last year on August 15th, as the new school year was then getting started. It contains information categorized into 4 areas, and you see that on the screen. The first area is our World Language Standards Instructional Toolkit resources. And so there's a whole list of things that are there for you to tap into for that. Then there's an area on teacher and classroom resources. And those are the things that specifically are most helpful to teachers in their work in creating a local curriculum from our standards. There's also a whole category for administrator and program resources, and this is where you as a coordinator may want to spend some time exploring even beyond what we're talking about today. And then finally, there's a professional learning space that lists things like our NCDPI professional development that's available to teachers, as well as other opportunities and options. So that's what we're going to focus on today. If you go to the NCDPI World Languages website, there are links to our World Languages Resources Hub, of course, but I wanted to explore this with you this morning so that you can get started this year in thinking about what will be most helpful to you, particularly for those of you who are new to your role. So let's start with our A, the administrator guides. And the administrator guides grew out of a tool we used to have with our standards, but have really become quite critical in helping people who are administrators with our programs. Maybe they're a principal who does annual evaluations for teachers. Maybe there's someone like you who's a coordinator who's new, who may or may not have a background in world language education. They can also be used to educate others, maybe a superintendent or school board members or even parents about what world language programs look like, how our standards function, and what that means when we talk about building proficiency in a language that a student is learning, and talking about that actual proficiency scale that we all use. So first things first, I want to show you where things are. The administrator guides have their own home. As you can see in the upper left-hand corner of this slide, they're in that space together. And that's a space that in the on the right-hand side you can see is in the administrator and program resources area. One thing that is good to do is to download one of these administrator guides and really start looking through it as we talk about it. So we have an administrator guide for classical language programs like Latin and Ancient Greek. We have one for dual and heritage language programs like dual language immersion and heritage language or native speakers programs. And we have one for modern language programs, which is when you're learning a language as a separate subject. And so you can see as you're looking across those are just screenshots of each of the three. Obviously, they all start with some information about our World Language Essential Standards, our state standards, and the actual proficiency scale. So before I go on, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and download one of those administrator guides. I'm going to put the links in the chat so you can just click right on them. Just choose one. Maybe the one that you have the most programs in, or maybe the one you're most curious about. Either way is fine. So click on one of those. I will also make these slides available in addition to the handout that I have. And you will note that the slides themselves actually link directly over to the spaces we're talking about. So for example, if I click on the administrator guides, oops, it takes me over to that space. So I'm going to wait just a moment so you can get administrator guide together. All right, so let's take a look at what's on the front of those administrator guides. So the administrator guides for world languages, all of them are considered what we call look-for documents. They're documents for principals and other administrators who are doing the K-12 teacher evaluation, and there's actually a support tool in there for for world language best practices. But each one starts with an overview of our K-12 world language programs, and you can see that based on the one you chose. Right above what you see here about our standards is a little description of that program to kind of guide you, whether it's a classical languages, dual and heritage languages, or modern languages. Then it's followed by information about the structure and goals of our World Language Essential Standards, which is what you see on the slide here. And then there's information that applies to each program, details about best practices, as I said, and about how to build language skills and build proficiency over time. So one of the questions we often get asked is, how are our standards structured in North Carolina, and how do they align to our national standards? So here you see on the screen, just like you do on the administrator guide you're looking at on page 1, information about our World Language Essential Standards, or WLES. And then there's an alignment to the ACTFL 5 Cs, are our national standards. And that's what you see pictured in the upper right-hand corner with those 5 different colored rings. Those are called the 5 Cs. So in North Carolina, our 5 Cs are woven together into strands and standards in our state standards. So we have 4 standards, as you know. We have, the first one is interpersonal communication. The second one is interpretive communication, like listening and reading and viewing. And the third one is presentational communication, like writing and rehearsed speaking. And so I've tried to color code this so you can see our first 3 standards are outlined in red because that's the red ring of communication in the national standards. So that's where that C is from the actual 5 Cs. In addition, the 4th standard is culture, and you can see that's kind of a purple ring in the 5 Cs, and so it's outlined in purple. Then in order to bring in the other Cs, we use strands. And so strands go throughout all of our standards, and so there are objectives that go for each standard aligned to the strand. So for connections to language and literacy, that's the strand of connections from the national standards. And then we have connections to connections to language and literacy and connections to other disciplines. I turned them around, my apologies. But you can see that connections to language and literacy is outlined in green. That's the comparisons one there in the 5Cs. And then the connections to other disciplines is the connections one from the 5Cs. And then finally, we have communities as a strand. And so you can see we are all aligned to the national standards, but we are also customized for what we have here in North Carolina. In addition, right next to that information on the administrator guides about our state standards is the ACTFL proficiency scale. And so here you see a screenshot of that. The ACTFL proficiency scale goes from novice low proficiency or basic skills when someone's learning a language all the way up to distinguished. However, in our North Carolina World Language Essential Standards, we have proficiency outcomes from novice low through advanced mid. When the standards were written and approved in 2010, the writers felt that the highest level a student could reach if they started a language and studied at K-12 was probably advanced mid. And so that's what we went with. North Carolina was the first state in the country to have proficiency-based K-12 world language standards, but nearly every other state now has that. And so that's very helpful to us because, as I'm sure you've heard, we're in the process of revising our state standards in North Carolina. So this will all be updated. And one of the things that is a benefit to us is that many other states now have gone to proficiency-based standards. So we have a lot more information and research to rely on as we revise and update what we have. All right, so that's the A, our administrator guides. But I also don't want to leave out the actual proficiency scale and talk to you a little bit more about that because that's critical in our work and understanding the actual proficiency scale and especially getting others to understand it who may have a limited language learning background. Many of the administrators we work with, for example, probably studied language as a modern language, maybe in high school or college. And so they may not know what 21st century language learning looks like and what the expectations are as far as building proficiency in all skill areas. So this ACTFL proficiency scale that you see in the administrator guides is a reflection of what we have, again, from the national level. Notice for the ACTFL proficiency inverted pyramid, as we call it, that they start with the lowest level, the novice low, where you have the smallest amount of language as you're building. And then as you go up towards, advanced mid, like we have in our state standards, or even beyond that, advanced high, superior, distinguished, language grows and it becomes more complex as it grows. So you have to know and be able to do more and more with the language you're learning as you move from novice low to mid to high, and then into intermediate, low, mid, and high, and then finally into advanced. And so it takes time to do that, as you might imagine, and it takes more time the further you go because of the complexity of language. One of the things you'll see in some of our materials for our state standards is a representation of those different proficiency levels across their sublevels. So for novice, we often have the picture of a parrot because at the novice level, especially low and mid and some high, you're really teaching students to repeat what they're learning and to put it together in a way to communicate. But they're kind of like a parrot when they first start because they're just repeating what they've learned and trying to make sense of it. At the intermediate level, we call that kind of the survivor. At that point, they've got enough language to be able to survive in a situation, to find food or shelter or whatever they need to in the language they're learning. But it may not be particularly graceful the way they do it, and they may have some other mistakes, but they'll survive. And the important thing is that they're building their skills and their language is becoming more complex, and they're actually creating language at that point, rather than just parroting or repeating back what they've learned. And finally, we have advanced, and that's a higher level. They often call that the storyteller level, as you can see here, or sometimes the reporter level. And that's where a learner has pretty good control of things like different time frames and can narrate and describe things in the past, the present, the future, and can really do quite a bit with language. And so you'll see these icons in some of the materials we have as a way to signal about the kind and level of language a student has at each point. In our administrator guides, as well as in our standards, and this is on page 2 if you're looking for these proficiency outcome charts on the administrator guide you're looking at, there are examples of our proficiency outcomes for a particular program. Now, there are many more extensive ones within the state standards document, but there's usually a basic one there in the administrator guides on page 2. And what you see here is, again, our standards, particularly the communication standards about interpersonal communication, interpretive communication, and presentational communication. And in this case, we're looking at the Modern Languages 1 for high school credit courses. And so you're seeing the level at which a student should be at after they finish a course, like level 1, level 2, level 3, and so on to level 8, which is what we have in our state standards for modern languages. You see that it changes over time. You may notice that sometimes over the 2 courses rather than just 1, students are focusing on a particular proficiency level. An important thing to remember about proficiency is that when we're talking about proficiency, it's a bit different than performance in the classroom. When you're in the classroom with students, as we all have been, right, you want to create lesson plans and under thematic units that get students involved in activities and assessments that push them to perform at a higher level than they might on their own outside of the classroom. But when we're talking about proficiency, what we're saying is once a student leaves the classroom or leaves your program and is out in the real world, that they can still use language to this particular level independent of their learning environment. So performance in the classroom looks a little bit different as you're building that proficiency and you push them to higher and higher levels. But the proficiency outcomes are what they can do when they leave that classroom on their own. And I'll pause here for a moment to see if there are any questions about A, the administrator guides, or A, the actual proficiency scale. All right. Well, always feel free to use any of those administrator guides. They have been updated. They were first published in 2014, but they have been updated since then to make sure they include our latest, hyperlinks and things like that to our resources.
I do have a question before you move on. Thank you for sharing this. Actually, my question will be, I have new administrators, so is there any a specific way that you think it should be presented to them? Just kind of like use this as you did, or any ideas?
I mean, I would encourage you to use this just like kind of what we went over. You'll get a link
Okay.
to the slide deck. You could actually download these slides if you want to use these slides or adapt them in some way for a presentation, let's say, to new administrators.
Okay.
I would always encourage you to do that. Certainly, you're aware, obviously, that you can download these. We did that. So
Right.
you may want to download these and email them out as an attachment
Right.
with some kind of explanation. You may want to create your own, um, you know, quick
Hmm.
video on what these are. Maybe focusing on the language programs that they have. Um,
Yeah. I'm planning to create a Canvas course, of course, I add, but I wasn't sure if you have any other ideas or if anybody else have done something that it will be beneficial. I have quite a bit of new administrators this year, so.
okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I would
Yes.
say, think about that. That's one thing you could bring as a question to the panel we're going to have on September 6th with the experience coordinators too.
Okay.
Or if you all, I mean, you all are on chat, if you have other ideas to help her, please add those to the chat. One of the important things about our World Language Coordinator Network in North Carolina is that we all share ideas. And so I would encourage you to do that starting this morning. Since you mentioned the Canvas course, I will also tell you that any of these materials that I'm showing you or anything that's available on the state website that I share for our use, you can also download and put in a Canvas course if you need to. Um, Sometimes that's easier to do when you have a local space like that. So always feel free to do that too. Right. Well, along with our A, I wanted to tell you about some other actual educator resources that you may want to take some time at some point to explore. And these are things that are very focused on those 5 C's like we were talking about with the 5 rings you see on the screen, or the inverted pyramid as a way to more deeply explore what we mean by those national standards and then how they are reflected in our state standards, as well as what we mean by proficiency and different levels of proficiency. So a couple things. The first one is the World Readiness Standards for Learning Languages. And so that's just an overview of those 5 Cs. There's actually a 2-page summary, as well as a short video about the 5 Cs and what we mean by those 5 Cs and sort of how they work to build language skills. So I'll put that in the chat as well. So that's a good resource to have for yourself or to share with others. There's also the ACTFL proficiency guidelines, and these are great because these have links to descriptions and video examples at the novice, intermediate, and advanced levels in 13 different languages. So we often use the English ones to give an example of, like, here's what novice sounds like, here's what intermediate sounds like, here's what advanced sounds like. But they're all available in many languages. So if you find yourself doing PD for a particular group of teachers, maybe all of your Spanish teachers or all of your Chinese teachers or whatever it is, you can actually get them in other languages. And not only are there videos to kind of show that, particularly for speaking skills, but there are writing samples, there are complete descriptions of the proficiency levels in the different languages. So again, if you have teachers where you think it would be helpful to them to have it in the language that they're teaching, or in their first language, if that's the case, by all means, tap into that resource. It's excellent. Also, the necessful, actful, can-do statements are a great help. These are I can statements that tell you what a student should be able to do at the novice, low through distinguished level. They're organized by mode, so interpretive communication, interpersonal, and presentational communication. And they have intercultural communication with what we call proficiency benchmarks, performance indicators, and then even classroom examples of I can statements. These are great because when we talk about proficiency-based standards, this is really what we're talking about, is understanding those different proficiency levels for the different skills. I told you that our standards were published in 2010. These successful, actual, can-do statements came out originally in 2013 as a national document, but most recently in 2017. So they are very much updated to what we have. And in fact, I will share with you later that when we put the bridging documents together, we were actually able to use these because they were available. So that helped us get a closer read, I think, on what we mean by proficiency at each level for each program and our proficiency outcomes. So those are good resources for you to look at more deeply when you're ready. The coordinators that I consulted with that you'll meet on September 6th also wanted me to give you a tip that they used when they were relatively new coordinators. They said you might want to use the English videos from the actual proficiency guidelines to help teachers of multiple languages. Because when we talk about learning proficiency and we do PD, you're often doing PD with teachers from multiple programs, and English becomes our common language then that we share. So that might be something to think about as a new coordinator. All right, so that's what we have for A today. Let's go ahead and move into B, the bridging documents. And the bridging documents are sort of interesting because, like I said, they came about because of a need that was recognized during the pandemic. We all wanted to keep students on track with their learning and keep them moving forward. And so when we thought about how do we do that in a standards-based environment, when teachers might be teaching online, in person, or in a hybrid situation, we decided kind of as a group, and that's the NCDPI World Languages team, as well as several coordinators from throughout the state who are very experienced. We decided to create these bridging documents to show how students sort of walk the bridge towards greater language skills and focus on those proficiency outcomes. So we have bridging documents, just like we have administrator guides. And as you might guess, we have one for classical language programs, dual language immersion programs, and dual and heritage programs in general, and then modern language programs. So once again, I'm going to ask you to download that. Download one of those that you want to work with. And again, just choose one that is maybe your most critical program at the moment. Maybe you've got professional development coming up with these teachers or about particular programs, so you can choose those. But notice that they're available for all, and that they are a great resource. And so I'm going to go out and go to our bridging documents. Just going to pick one here. Let's do the modern language one. And this is what they look like. So you can see that we have, again, our standards at the top, with interpretive, interpersonal, and presentational, as well as culture with investigate and interact, which from the successful, actful, can-do statements is what you'll find as far as the little icons you see here, as well as intercultural communication with investigate and interact. And so every bridging document asks the question over there at the left, what do we expect students to know and be able to do in K-12 courses? In this case, the K-12 modern world language courses. And so it says by the end of this course, your students should be able to answer yes to the I can statements. So notice here with modern languages, it starts out in a K-5 FLES, foreign language in elementary school or middle school, beginning or continuing program. And for each standard we have, there's an I can statement that the student should be able to say, yes, I can do what it says here in each of these standards area by the end of my course or program. Not every student has the opportunity to take language at K-8, but as you get into things like level 1 high school credit courses, which are available, of course, to our middle school students as well as high school students, again, you see this developing proficiency. You see the icons, the parrots, since you're at novice levels, right? And as you go through, you go up through level 2, and then level 3, where you have inherently honors, they're starting to reach intermediate levels of proficiency. So now you've got the survivor icon. Level 4, there's still the survivor level, and this is where they can earn the Global Languages Endorsement, or GLE, NC Seal of Biliteracy, which we'll talk about later, and then into level 5. Now, there are levels beyond that, but this is just an example. One thing that's important about our World Language Essential Standards is that when they were written, the stakeholders who provided feedback on the drafts agreed that the proficiency expectations, as I told you, should extend through advanced med for most programs. And then those proficiency expectations or student outcomes for programs and courses were designed to be challenging yet reasonable. They were goals for our K-12 group of language learners, and they built on the knowledge that some students will go beyond those expectations or outcomes, but the majority of students in a particular course or program would reach those. We did, at the time, compile those expectations based on the best information we had and the best research. And as I mentioned, we're in the process of revising our state standards. So I imagine some of that will be updated as we go. When it comes to our proficiency outcomes, as I mentioned, all of the proficiency outcome charts come from our World Language Essential Standards. And so we've talked about what's in the administrator guides with example proficiency outcomes charts from the standards. We've talked a little bit about the bridging documents and how we use those icons to talk about the outcomes. And we even have some instructional support tools in general in the clarifying objectives by course outcomes that we'll talk about here in a minute. But when you go to the state standards, what you will see for proficiency outcome charts is what you see here coming up on the screen. Notice that they're highly color-coded. They are not color-coded as of yet to the inverted pyramid from ACTFL with proficiency because ACTFL didn't have the inverted pyramid when we did this in 2010. But you can see how proficiency changes over time. You can see it going from novice levels into intermediate or advanced depending on the program. And so all of those original charts are also in the state standards if you need them beyond what's available in the administrator guides and the bridging documents and so forth. Couple things I want to talk about with our proficiency outcomes related to State Board of Education policy or SBE policy, right? I kind of mentioned that middle school students can earn high school credit in world languages and other subject areas too, by the way, but we're going to focus on world languages today. And also the CDM or credit by demonstrated mastery process can be used for any high school credit world language course in the state standards. So to think about that a little bit, I pulled up this chart. This is the modern languages chart. But just to give you an example, when we talk about middle school students earning high school credit in world languages, levels 1 through 4 are available for that in all of our modern languages as well as classical languages. And then levels 1 through 6 are available for high school credit to middle schoolers in languages where we have dual language immersion programs, because we were finding that our students coming through K-5 and K-8 dual language immersion programs are reaching higher levels of proficiency and need to be placed appropriately in their courses, either earning credit as they might do with, let's say, the courses they take in their DLI program language in the middle school, because they might be taking things like a level 2 or 3 course actually in the language, or even a heritage language 1 or 2 course. So we extended that to level 6 for them, but that's also kind of the reason why we go to level 8 in modern languages is, again, we saw students reaching higher levels of proficiency when they had had early experiences in K-5 or K-8 with language learning. Also with the CDM process, we wanted to make sure that was readily available because we often have students coming from either early language learning programs like, foreign language in elementary school or dual language immersion programs, as well as other experiences. We have many military connected families in North Carolina. Some of those families have been deployed other places and have been learning in a language other than English. And this was a way, particularly through the CDM process, that their language learning could be assessed and they could be given credit for what they had already done or placed appropriately starting in middle school to get high school credit in a language. And so that's available. And so I wanted to make you aware of that. Also keep in mind, because I do get this question often from coordinators, novice coordinators as well as veteran ones, that any course described in our state standards, any high school credit course, can be used for the CDM process. So you may have other kinds of guidelines locally, and you're certainly welcome to do that. But from the state standpoint, you can offer CDM to any course in the state standards. That, of course, does not include things like advanced placement or national baccalaureate, which you cannot do the CDM process with because those are not in our state standards, either in world languages or any other area. But the ones that are described in our state standards document can be used for the CDM. A couple other things to remember when it comes to policy, because you may get questions about this as a coordinator. We do have a high school diploma endorsement. That's grad 007. That describes NC's seal of biliteracy, the global languages endorsement. There are actually 5 high school diploma endorsements, and so the seal of biliteracy is just one of them. Also, when it comes to high school transcript standards, so grad policy 009, level 3 and above world language courses are inherently advanced and always get honors GPA weighting. So just to kind of picture that, again, levels 3 and higher get inherently honors courses. So there's no standard version of levels 3 through 8 courses or levels 3 through 6 if you're looking at classical languages. They are always honors courses. And then, as I mentioned earlier on the bridging documents, the state seal of biliteracy, when a student completes a level 4 or higher world language course, that's one option they have for fulfilling the world languages requirement for that GLE, that global languages endorsement. Of course, they must meet requirements as well for English, and they may in fact complete higher levels or take another option to fulfill the world languages requirement for the GLE. But completing that level 4 or higher course is usually the most common option students choose for the GLE world languages requirement. So I wanted you to be aware of those policies because you may get questions or you may already be working with things like your CDM policy or honors levels courses and whatnot. All right, so that's B, the bridging documents and all of our proficiency outcomes. Before we move on to the C in our orientation this morning, are there any questions about this or about the policies? Uh, the one on the last slide. Yeah, I will share the bit.ly links. Do you want the bit.ly links to the seal of biliteracy? Is that what you're after? Gotcha. Okay, give me just a moment. I will put that in the chat right now so that we can all go out to it. And I will tell you that the seal of biliteracy is part of one of the global education recognitions that in this case the students can earn. So I've just clicked out to that. You'll notice that those global education recognitions extend to educators with the Global Educator Digital Badge, as well as schools with the Global Ready School designation and districts with the Global Ready District designation. But when you take that bit.ly link that we just put in the chat, you'll go out here to the students, you'll hit the drop down menu, and you can see a number of things about the GLE that could be important. So there's an overview of that. There's policy requirements for both English and world languages described there, including the options for the world languages requirement. There's additional notes and information about things like the exam list if students are going to use an external exam to complete the world languages requirement. There's information about CDM support because students can use the CDM process either to fulfill the world languages requirement or possibly the English requirement, or to be on track to do that and to move towards, let's say, a level 4 course or higher. There's also a GLE user guide for PowerSchool. The GLE is automated in PowerSchool, and so you'll be able to go into that guide, take a look and see how you can get a list of students who are on their way to completing the requirements for the GLE. And there's also information there about, for example, if a student does use an external exam option to fulfill a requirement, how to enter that information so it's in PowerSchool. There's a GLE FAQs information, so all kinds of questions. There's 20 questions actually that can be asked about the GLE so far, and you can go there. And then we have data about the GLE from its start in 2015 to the present. And you can look by charter school or by district how many students and in what languages the GLE has been earned by each graduating class. And then there's a number of GLE materials like a brochure, communications toolkit, where to buy the diploma seals if you want to do that, or how to make your own if you need to, and a variety of GLE presentations. We even did a GLE asynchronous webinar series last spring. And so you can see that there's 3 different parts to that and different topics we cover. And you're able to access all of those, the slides and the recording of the information. And there's a world languages self-paced Canvas course we're going to talk about a little bit later that includes information about the GLE. One thing we've tried to do, because we are limited on our DPI websites, as you can see here, to a lot of text, is we have tried to create visuals and graphics that you can use as well. So for example, the policy requirements are spelled out here, but we do have an infographic that's available up here. And you can click on that and see the world languages and English language arts requirements in a way that is much more visual and that you could use in like presentations or sharing information. A lot of those details are also available either in the brochure. If you scroll down here about our materials, there's the GLE brochure and the communications toolkit. So again, there's a bit.ly link to those, and you can get the brochure and find out more about it, or share that information, or create your own local brochure if you would like to. There's also a communications toolkit that links to all the resources we just talked about, the page, the FAQs, the infographic, the brochure, and different kinds of things about promoting and learning about the GLE. So there's a lot there, but that's where you can get started with all of the information. All right, any other questions or anything? All right, let's roll on. So we reached the C in our ABCs and D presentation, and I want to talk to you about our clarifying objectives by course outcomes, or COCOs documents. That's what they came to be called, and some language specific resources that are available in our World Languages Resources Hub. First and foremost, we have clarifying objectives by course outcomes documents for every language we teach in North Carolina. That information is housed in the teacher and classroom resources section, as you might imagine. Here's a list of our languages alphabetically, so that you can see that are currently taught in North Carolina's K-12 public schools, or soon will be. Notice that we go from ASL, American Sign Language, through Urdu. And then we have a space for others because we are a local control state. And so if another language becomes of importance and you start a program in one of your schools for that language, we want you to be able to have support for that, first in the state standards, and second of all, in the resources like the COCOs document. So for example, if you decide to offer another classical language, like ancient Greek, in addition to, or Latin, let's say, there's materials for you for that because that's considered a classical language as well. Also, if you decide to offer a language, a modern language, one that's spoken in someone's first language somewhere in the world, other than the ones listed here, we want you to have those materials too. That's under other modern languages. So for example, right now we don't have specific COCOs for, let's say, Korean, but if you were teaching Korean, you could use the other modern languages COCOs and most importantly, the course codes and things like that for them. Because one of the things that COCOs have is that they have details like course codes for the different levels that you're seeing, and then they have the standards and objectives with the proficiency outcomes for a particular level or program that you're looking at. So let's kind of take a look at that. I wanted you to choose one language and we'll explore its COCOs page. So take a moment, and of the languages you see listed there, please put in the chat which language page you would like to explore so that we can do that together. What do you want to see? I'll give everybody a minute to pop in what they would like to see. See a vote right now for Spanish and Cherokee. Japanese. Okay. We've got a variety going on here. Nice. Well, I'll tell you what, let's do. Let's click over to the Clarifying Objectives by Course Outcomes page. And I will put that in the chat, that direct link to that page while you're finishing up, letting me know which language you want to look at. And I'm going to link over to that page. It's linked on this slide already. And now we're in the World Languages Resources Hub. You can see we use that icon for the COCOs. There's a description of what the COCOs are about. And as I said, they're standards-based curriculum writing documents for North Carolina. They're compiled from our proficiency charts and our student outcomes. One thing to know about the COCOs documents is they're downloadable as Word documents. So that'll make it easy for you and your teachers to download what you need and to start typing right into your own copy of those materials. You can even link things like the resources you're going to use, or maybe if you have a Canvas space or some other platform that you use to house materials or units, let's say, for different language courses, you can put that in there. What I've set up here is a way to go, so basically that every language has its own page, and you click on the language button to go to the specific K-12 language page, and you can see its sequence of courses, the course codes, and then those COCOs or CO2 documents for curriculum writing. So let me see what we got here. We have 2 votes for Spanish, but we also have a vote for Cherokee and Japanese. So let's start with Spanish and kind of go over it. Click on the Spanish button, and it takes me out to that Spanish K-12 page. There's sort of a repeat of what's here about what COCOs documents are, and a reminder that, you know, these are downloadable as Word documents. Notice that our K-12 bridging documents that apply to this language and its programs are posted here as well. So there's some duplication within the World Languages Resources Hub so that you can always sort of find what you need, hopefully, close by. So there's the Modern Languages Bridging document, because Spanish is taught as a separate subject. And there's the Dual Language Immersion and Heritage Language Bridging document, because Spanish is taught in our DLI programs as well as in heritage language programs like 1 and 2. So all of our K-12 pages are arranged the same way. They are truly K-12, meaning they start with elementary courses. You have a description from the state standards about what those elementary language courses are, like, you know, how much time is required to do that, what each one is. And then you have the proficiency expectations and the course codes here to talk about what you should be using and entering into your system for students. And as you go through that, and give me a minute, this over here to the right hand side, there's actually a picture of Nikki, the Global Ready student, that has to load a little bit. So it takes it a while. But as you go down those elementary courses, you'll see that there's a Google folder that has all the COCOs documents. And you just click on that. It takes you out to the Google folder, and you can download what you need for your programs and your curriculum writing. Since it's K-12, the next group up is middle school courses. And again, there's a description straight from the standards about those middle school courses, what they entail, and some examples of how that would work. So for those of you getting started with like beginning or continuing middle school courses that do not give high school credit, those are available there. there is a note about middle schools can offer high school credit courses to their students, and as part of the CDM process as well, and that those details are available in the high school credit section. But again, here are the middle school COCOs that you can download. And then we have K-8 because Spanish is one of the 8 languages where we have DLI programs. And so again, we have COCOs for those different programs. For DLI programs, they are course outcomes by grade span, as opposed to course level or grade level, etc. And so you can see that they have them here, and you can download those. Then we get to high school. Here's all of our high school credit courses, a description of those and how they work, information about middle school having flexibility to offer high school credit courses. There's also a section about community college world language courses. Some of you have early college programs, for example, where your students are taking your world language courses through the community college and maybe also through high school courses. And so it's important that we know what that alignment is. And so there's a document that actually covers that. And then you can see here, like when we talk about Spanish 1, here's Spanish 1's course code, and then what its equivalent is at early college, which is also on this chart up here on the high school to community college alignment document. So that's available. We have details about levels 3 through 8 being inherently advanced courses like we talked about. Here's the rest of the Spanish courses, and here's the COCOs documents. So if you open those up, for example, and you say I want to look at level 1, level 1 applies equally to all alphabetic languages. So you have, if you open that document up, not only the course code for Spanish 1, which is up here in the list, but you also have the other course codes that use this same level 1 proficiency outcomes. So you see you have standard number 1, proficiency outcomes for interpersonal communication are actually novice mid. And so you have all the novice mid clarifying objectives from the state standards. But you also have the information up here about, for example, course codes to use for high school or for middle school students taking high school credit courses. So lots of details on the COCOs documents that are available for you. And then depending on the language and which K-12 page you're looking at, you can also go down and there's information if they have heritage language programs in that language, which obviously all of our modern language courses do have that. There's a description of those courses. There's an example, and then there are documents for that as well, and course codes too for languages, certainly beyond Spanish. Again, all alphabetic languages that offer heritage language courses would use the same ones. There's resources for the heritage language programs. And then we get into advanced learning programs, and these are ones that are not in our state standards per se, but often students take courses up to this level where they're offered. So like an AP Spanish course could be offered maybe to level 5 or so. You might have Cambridge International Education, you might have International Baccalaureate. So there are details for those advanced learning programs that students would be taking our world language state standards courses in order to get to and be successful. So you can see that all of that's included. And at the end of each page, you can go back to the COCOs landing page if you want to choose a different language. So I saw that we had Cherokee and Japanese. Cherokee is actually a revitalization program in our state. But again, the Cherokee K-12 page looks much the same as the others. It starts out with a repeat of things. It has the modern languages and the DLI bridging document. And then it goes the same way. Elementary courses, middle school courses, our K-8 DLI courses, and then high school credit courses. And details, of course, about heritage language programs in Cherokee. Then we loop back, and like I said, I think I saw Japanese. Japanese is kind of interesting because, you know, we were looking a lot at alphabetic languages before with Spanish and Cherokee. Japanese and Chinese are logographic languages. And again, they have documents regarding the bridging documents and so forth and DLI, but the same kind of thing exists. Here's our elementary school Japanese courses and their course codes and their COCOs, the middle school ones as well. And then our K-8 ones, we do have Japanese DLI in the state. And then we get to our high school credit courses. And they have the same thing as all of the other ones. If there is a community college offering, there's the equivalent of that so that you can look at it. And then you can always look to that alignment document as well if you want to share that with folks to make sure, particularly if students are taking a combination of high school credit courses and community college courses to meet their world language requirement, like for the GLE, that they stay on track to do that and complete the courses they need and in the correct sequence. And then as before, we have heritage language for Japanese, of course. With the example of Chinese this time, another logographic language. But you can see that, again, they have COCOs. Because it's a logographic language, of course, we have those particular course codes that go with our logographic languages, in this case for level 1. And we do have some details about advanced learning programs. All right, so those are our COCOs pages. I will tell you that we are anticipating building into some other languages soon that will be offered in K-12 programs across North Carolina. So we may add to this and we may have additional courses and course codes on our COCOs documents. We'll just have to wait and see. Another thing in the Teacher and Classroom Resources section of the World Languages Resources Hub is our language specific information. And this is really important because particularly when the pandemic started and we needed to find as many resources online as we could to share with others. The national group that I'm involved in, particularly the regional version of it, the SCoS, National Council of State Supervisors for Languages, started compiling a list of free online resources that teachers could use in any state standards as they built a local curriculum. And we have continued that so that we have resources for as many of our languages as possible. You'll see a couple on here that weren't on the list for the COCOs documents, and that's because those are in the purple colors, so Bulgarian, Czech, Irish, Korean, and Vietnamese. Those are languages that either we anticipate will be offered soon in our K-12 public schools, like Korean, or that are very prominent as heritage language communities in North Carolina. So there's a Bulgarian and Czech heritage or weekend school happening. Irish is now being taught at the community college level, so it's probably only a matter of time before we have that in K-12. And Vietnamese has a pretty good sized community, particularly because of some global headquarters and offices that have been moved here with some companies that are based in Vietnam. And so if you go over to the language specific information page, you will simply see in the hub that we have whatever is available for free and online listed in alphabetical order. So again, we start with American Sign Language and we work our way down. The languages are always listed alphabetically. And one thing to note is that the inclusion of resources on these lists does not constitute endorsement or verification by NCDPI. So whatever local requirements you have to make resources available, please follow those in sharing these with your teachers or in using them for your work. But we do have quite a variety. And if you ever know of any others that are free online resources that are tools or materials that could be used basically in anyone's local curriculum, let me know and I will make sure to add them so that we have as many options as possible for our teachers. All right, well, I'm conscious of our time. I want us to finish up quickly. If you can stay on with us, that's great. If not, you can come and see the recording later. We are moving into the last section, the D, or development or professional development for teachers. And there's a whole professional learning section to the World Languages Resources Hub. You see it pictured in the upper right-hand corner there. There are free resources available from NCDPI, like our Canvas courses that are available, or the webinar archives that you can use in a variety of ways locally. There's also information about the professional organizations in North Carolina that support our work. So for example, FLANC, the Foreign Language Association of North Carolina, SCOLT, the Southern Conference on Language Teaching, which is our regional professional organization, and then of course ACTFL, the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, our national group. Let's just take a quick look, given our time constraints, at this professional learning section. So I'm putting that in the chat so you can go right to it. And I will click over to the professional learning. One thing to know about our World Languages Resources Hub is that in each section, each main category, like this is professional learning, there's always an overview page. And so this kind of talks to you about, what professional learning opportunities are available here. And then it goes through each of them. So from NCDPI, we have 3 so far self-paced Canvas courses that are designed for world language educators and colleagues. You can click over the Canvas courses page and get enrollment instructions for any of them. There's CAST for world languages, Counselor Advising and Scheduling Tips, or CAST for world languages. There's a dual language immersion blue book study. And there's Introduction to Linguafolio, which is a formative assessment tool for language learners. So they're all available there. There's instructions on how to enroll in those through NESIS, the North Carolina Educator Evaluation System, and get credit, again, because it's self-paced, as well as information about how to download the Canvas course. If you as a coordinator would like to offer it locally in your own instance of Canvas, either in whole or in part, for what you're doing with teachers. There's also details about the NCDPI World Languages team and us offering asynchronous professional learning. This is going to be updated, of course, to reflect our new school year, and then some materials are going to be posted here throughout the year. As I mentioned, there's archives from past annual webinar series. We did an annual webinar series for about 10 years in world languages, starting back in about 2013 or 2014. And so all of those materials that are still available and pertinent to your work are there in case you want them. There's also links, as I said, to FLANK, our Foreign Language Association of North Carolina, to SCoS, our regional group, and to ACTFL. So you can find all of that there. If I click on the home button at any time when I'm in the hub, and that's on the left-hand side, as you can see there, I click on that and it takes me back to the landing page, which is kind of where we started with our work this morning. And you can see then some information about it. You see the 4 main categories, and here you see beneath each one the links to the pages that we talked about. So there you see the administrator guides that we went to first under administrator and program resources, the bridging documents page under teacher and classroom resources, and the COCOs page there, along with many, many other ones beyond our A, B, C, and D. All right. Well, let's wrap up and talk about next steps. Thank you all for hanging on this morning for our broadcast. First and foremost, I wanted to remind you, of course, that the slides and recordings of the session will be posted soon so that you can use them with the coordinator to go handout and all the links from this presentation. I'll go ahead and post that link in there, but please know this coordinator to go handout, which you see pictured there, will soon have the recording of this broadcast. So you will be able to get that as well. But I'm putting that into the chat for you to start looking at now. Also, we have 4 NCDPI listservs for World Language Educator. There's one for World Language Instructors, it's K20, one for World Language Education News in general, which often has our monthly updates on the standards revision process, one for DLI educators, and one for NC Linguafolio. And then there are others from NCDPI, like about global education or charter schools, or even K-12 legislation if you're interested in tracking that. So you can always sign up for those updates. One thing I would say to you is always know that as a coordinator, I maintain a list and a listserv just for us. And so I always send a copy of everything I send on listservs to the World Language Coordinator listserv, so you'll see those regardless. But you can certainly encourage people to sign up for the listservs if they're interested, or you can sign up for more listservs for yourself. All right. And I'll go ahead and put that link in the chat as well if you want to sign up for any of those right away. All right, next steps. Let's talk about what we do next. First of all, I'm going to be offering office hours on Wednesdays at this same time from 9 to 10 throughout August. So next Wednesday, the 16th, the Wednesday following it, the 23rd, and the last Wednesday in August on the 30th, I will be here. And if you are interested in talking more about this, or you have a specific question, or you just want to discuss some topic related to policy or the standards or something like that with world languages, please join me on there. There's information on that document about you just shooting me a quick email and wanting to be added to the appointment for those office hours on Wednesdays in August. We'll also have a World Language Coordinators panel where you'll get to hear from two experienced coordinators, Dr. Leslie Balder from Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools, as well as Mara Coe from Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools. They will be with us on Wednesday, September 6th from 10 to 11 a.m. To discuss sort of what they've learned over time and answer any questions you have about your coordinator role and what you might do. It's a good time to, bring questions to them. And then finally, we will be having a follow-up hybrid session to this orientation refresher on Friday, October 6th. And that will be in the morning, either online or in person near the Flank conference, the Flank Fall conference that's happening that weekend that follows, October 7th and 8th. So that will be from 9 to 11 a.m. So I encourage you to sign up for that if you're interested as well. And speaking of that, we do have coordinator meetings seasonally, and these are hybrid meetings, and they're actually K-20, where there'll be K-12 world language coordinators and our colleagues from the Institutes of Higher Education, like our universities and community colleges. Those are on Friday afternoons before the Flank Conference from 1 to 4. They're always near the Flank Conference site. So on October 6th, for example, in the afternoon, we will be meeting as a K-20 group, and I invite you to come to that either, like I said, in person if you're already there for the Flint conference, or join us online like you have today. We do that meeting in a hybrid fashion. Likewise, for the Flank Spring Conference, which is in early March, the Friday before the conference is March 1st. And so we will be having an afternoon session for K-20, again, coordinators and IHE colleagues. Please know also that the Flank Spring Conference includes the DLI seminar and usually includes DLI school site visits in the morning. So that's why we have our meeting in the afternoon in case you want to go to a school site visit. I'm seeing a question from someone wanting to know, is DPI offering sponsorship for teachers to attend the Flank conference? Good question. We do not know that yet. The sponsorships have come from our ML Title III or ESL group in the past, and they have not indicated yet which conferences will be available for sponsorships this year. Please know if sponsorships are available. I share that information on the listserv so that you're aware of it and can either apply for a sponsorship or, go ahead and pass that along to your teachers to attend the Flank conferences. When we have sponsorships, they are often available for Flank as well as other kinds of conferences, maybe SCoS or ACTFL, it just depends. One thing I will say to you though, since you're asking that question, is if we click on the 2023 Flank Fall Conference information, Flank actually has a number of scholarships for people to attend the conference. And so here's just their main website about the conference this year, the Flank Fall Conference. You can see some basic details. But what they have is they have beginning teacher scholarships. And so if I go over to, I believe it's the awards. Give me just one moment, please. Yes, scholarships and award under memberships. They have the Beginning Teacher Fall Conference Scholarship for K-12 teachers. So if you have a teacher who is in their first, second, or third year of teaching in North Carolina, they can apply for this and they can get fully reimbursed for the Beginning Teacher Conference registration fee, which is actually a discount for the regular fee, the full fee. And they also get a free 3-hour workshop at no cost as part of that. So that's something to keep in mind. And again, I share that information on the listservs so that people have time to apply. I believe this year it is due September 22nd. So we've got a little bit of time if you're interested in having teachers apply, or if you yourself are actually a new educator to North Carolina and want to apply. But again, many times in the newsletters I send out, if there are opportunities like that for grants or scholarships or something like that, they will be in there. So please pay attention to that. You will always get a copy because you're on the World Language Coordinators listserv, and you can always pass it along or share the information with whoever you need to put it into action for your districts or schools. That's it. I invite you to always come to us as an NCDPI World Languages team. It's myself. I'm Anne Marie Gunter, your World Languages consultant. You can see my email and phone number. We're also on Twitter. Also, my supervisor, Dr. Stacy Daniel, she's the section chief of English Language Arts and Languages. So she has English Language Arts, World Languages, and Multilingual Learners Title III representatives like with ESL. So you can contact us at any time. If you want to go to our landing page or the World Language Resources Hub, you see that information there. I'll pop it in the chat too so that it's readily available so you can explore those resources if you need to. And then again, you're welcome to reach out to me via email or phone, um, whatever works for you. I do appreciate you joining us this morning. I hope you've learned something that you can use today or at least right away.